So at this point, I'm going to ask Dr. Pasquale, who's the Deputy Chief Medical Examiner in the Borough of Queens, to please address us. Thank you.
Good evening. Dr. Melissa Pasquale, Deputy Chief Medical Examiner for Queens, and thank you for inviting me to come and talk to you. Thank you for being willing to talk about addiction, but most importantly, I'm really here to talk to you about what we are seeing at the Office of Chief Medical Examiner, which is only the dead. Certainly the drug crisis that we're seeing in New York City is affecting a whole lot more people than just the dead that come to us. But I'm going to give you some information about what we're seeing and what's concerning us the most right now. So back before 2005 or so, when we would see drug overdoses in New York City, it was really often cocaine, sometimes heroin. And then after 2005, we started to still see cocaine, but we started to see an increase in prescription drug abuse. This country has a real problem with prescription opiates, meaning things like oxycodone and Percocet, Vicodin, that have been overprescribed, and people have, we started to see a lot of people who are mixing that with alcohol or becoming addicted and developing tolerance, needing more and more, mixing it with other medications, and so we saw this increase in prescription drug abuse. And then across the United States, we started to get a little bit smarter about our prescribing practices. And so there's been sort of an increased awareness and crackdown on prescribing things like oxycodone, Vicodin, Percocet, and not prescribing as much. And what we start to see then is a shift from prescription drug overdose back toward heroin. Heroin is also an opiate drug that acts in the same way as oxycodone, Vicodin, Percocet. These drugs are very heavy painkillers, but they also work to slow respirations. And when people die, it's because they basically stop breathing. And so what you see then is people who can no longer get their prescribed opiates and then shift to buying heroin on the street to sort of feed that need for opiates that they've already become addicted to. But then, beyond that, then you have young kids who never necessarily started with the prescription drug overdose or drug abuse, who may have sampled their parents or grandparents or somebody's prescription medications and gotten a taste for it, but that start using things like heroin on the street. And up, right around 2010, we were averaging for years running around between 500 and 600 drug overdoses in New York City every year. And then about 2014, it was creeping up, and then 2015 is when we saw our first big spike. In 2015, it went to over 900 drug overdose deaths in New York City. The 2016 totals are almost done. We still have a few pending cases left, but right now we're already looking at more than 1,300 drug overdose deaths in New York City for 2016, and it's going up. We do not believe we have seen the peak yet. And so these are, what we're seeing is now still heroin. We're seeing a lot less of the oxycodone and the Vicodin, but what we're seeing is a lot of heroin, and even scarier is this new drug that we are seeing called fentanyl. If you haven't heard of it, that's spelled Fentanyl. Now, if you've heard of fentanyl, you probably know that it is a very, very powerful, potent drug that is anywhere from 50 to 100 times more powerful than morphine. All of these opiate drugs morphine is an opiate drug and acts in the same manner. And so they're powerful painkillers. Fentanyl is a pharmaceutical drug usually that is prescribed sometimes to cancer patients at the end of their lives who are in a lot of pain. And it's prescribed with patches or even sometimes lollipops. But it's a prescribed, very well-controlled drug. And now we are seeing it bought on the street and mixed with heroin. Sometimes it is alone as fentanyl. and sometimes it's even mixed with cocaine. We are finding that sometimes we think people are buying what they think is heroin or they think is cocaine, or even sometimes that they think is stamped as to appear like an oxycodone or a Xanax pill, and it's really fentanyl, and they don't necessarily know it at all. It's an extremely powerful drug that can be injected, but and I think that when we think about heroin, we think of intravenous drug abuse, and the truth is that a lot of these people are not injecting it, or they don't start that way. If teenagers are getting hooked on this, teenagers are usually not too quick to want to pick up a needle and stick it in their arm to get high. They're starting with this drug and they're snorting it or swallowing it. But then, eventually, often at the end of drug addiction, sometimes people need to just get a faster, quicker high, and at that point, they're so desperate that is when they become willing to put a needle into their arm and inject it. But the scariest thing about this fentanyl is that it is so powerful that when we are seeing drug overdoses right now, we very often see the person sitting slumped over forward, still with the needle in their arm. They are dying so fast that they haven't even taken the needle out of their arm yet. This is very powerful, very rapid, stops breathing. So this fentanyl that we're seeing that in drug overdoses right now is not pharmaceutical fentanyl. It's not coming from drug companies and getting onto the street the same way that the oxycodone and the Vicodin and the Percocet were prescribed medications that were making their way onto the street. This is a manufactured illicit fentanyl. To the best of our knowledge at this point, it is manufactured in another country where it's transported to yet another country, mixed in with heroin, and then transported into the United States as either just heroin or mixed with just fentanyl or mixed with heroin. But this is manufactured illicit drug that is coming into the country and ending up on our streets. Sometimes packaged as heroin, sometimes marked again as pills that people may think they're taking something else. The entire point is that if you're picking up drugs off the street for any reason, you have no idea what you're really getting. So it's the people that are affected in New York City are everybody. It's in all of our boroughs. Statistically, Manhattan is right now carrying a little bit higher numbers, but it's in all the boroughs. But this is not a local problem. This is not just a local batch of bad drug on the street. This is a nationwide problem right now that actually has hit some other cities even harder and faster before it started hitting New York City. Cleveland has been suffering badly with this for years. It's been spiking in Atlanta, Detroit, Chicago, throughout all the major cities of the Midwest, and pretty much all up the northeastern corridor. So what's being done about this? Locally, we are working very, very closely at the medical examiner office with the Department of Health, who are tracking these very closely. There is a very stepped up efforts by the New York City Police Department to now start investigating drug overdoses. It used to be that a drug overdose was something that they didn't necessarily investigate because it's hard to control recreational drug use. But given that we've got this powerful drug on the street that we need to try to track down and get rid of, they're starting to investigate drug overdose deaths, much more carefully, trying to track down really where the source of the drug is. That's what they're looking for. We're also meeting regularly with our federal and state partners. There's a high-intensity drug trafficking agency that is a federal agency that operates locally in New Jersey and New York City that meets regularly and is putting a lot of funding and attention into efforts to get on top of the drug problem in this area. So what can you do? Just talking about it, acknowledging it, that there is a problem, and thinking about the prescription drugs that are in your home and who has access to them, and how those things get on the street. I can tell you that the health department has definitely seen a decrease in the prescribing of opiate medications such as the oxycodone, Vicodin, and Percocet. And that is expected to be the beginning of a potential resolution of the problem. And the idea is that if you can decrease the prescription drugs, you decrease the number of people who get addicted by the prescribed medications, in order that you end up with less of those prescription medications getting into the hands of kids, getting onto the street sold as pills. And if you can decrease that that introduction to addiction, then you also hopefully can decrease the number of people who resort to heroin and fentanyl after they can't get access to the prescription medications anymore. But that is a very long, slow process. We didn't get into this quickly, and we're not going to get out of it quickly. And so it was years of prescription drug abuse that built up and fed into this new heroin fentanyl crisis. And it's going to take us some time to hopefully exit out of it. So like I said, we don't think we've seen our peak yet in New York City. At this point, if 2017 continues as we're going right now, we could end up even higher than 2016. So it's thinking about the meds that are in your home and who has access to them, and making sure that that nobody has access to those except the person who's taking them for prescribed reasons. And just to leave you, with a few brief comments about how this impacts people personally, it's every single day we are having families. I think that there is rarely a day that goes by in any of our offices in New York City where we don't have a drug overdose death. And these are people that, quite frankly, they look like me. And when I talk to their families, I'm talking to families that I can relate to as if they were my own families. These are people who many fall within my own demographic. And it's heartbreaking to talk to them because, first of all, I tell them that, that it's a drug overdose when we get the results. And these aren't a surprise to a lot of people. And one of the first things I often say is, this has been a really long struggle, hasn't it? And you can hear the audible sigh, just the pain of how long that they've been struggling with this, with their family member, and how really, really sad it is. And just yesterday, I was talking to this mother who lost her son. He was 33 years old, if I remember correctly. And she was sobbing on the phone and saying that, she said, I don't understand how this could happen. She said, yes, he's been having problems with drugs, but he was getting better. He was visiting his kids. He had a job lined up. She said he had the biggest heart. She said a couple weeks ago, I felt sick. And she lived up in Connecticut. He lived in Astoria. And she said he got on the train and went 2 hours into Connecticut just to bring her a cup of coffee and a newspaper, and then went right back home. And she said, he was a good kid. And I said, yes. I said, these aren't bad people who get addicted and end up dead, and their families are not bad people. This is happening to good people. So anyway, I just want to let you know that we are very committed at the New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner, under the direction of Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Barbara Sampson, to continue to look carefully at the drug cases coming in. And we are constantly working to improve our practice of getting faster toxicology turnaround time so that we can feed data to the police department and to the health department faster. And we're pretty committed to working on this with you.